So, the federal government made this move. They established this policy by executive order to offer some lip service to protecting the Bering Sea. And I asked you if the tribal villages were involved, if there was a process, and you said no, we don't have money, we're not funded to pull it together.
Yeah, it's not that we don't want to. We want to. Can you imagine the State of the Bering Sea report done by Native people around the entire Bering Sea that's published, let's say, every 2 years? That would change the way, number one, that people hear or not hear Native ways of knowing. And number two, change the way that we manage things, because the management that is being done now is, for example, we view the science as taking apart pieces of creation and studying it in hopes that we can understand the whole. When the Native people look at the whole and realize that it's greater than the sum of its parts, and therefore studying one piece of it is not going to get you there. And scientists are now just beginning to understand this. Therefore, there's developing ecosystem approaches. But even that is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what needs to be done from the eyes of Native people.
You had been raised in an environment that required you to expand your consciousness, your visual field, to come to grips with your role in this place. So how do these teachings, how could these teachings contribute to better management?
Well, for example, just one example, which is a stretch for most scientists and researchers, is that language is more special than most linguists give it. It contains a vibration. These are languages of people who've been in an area for thousands of years. That it contains a vibration that comes from Mother Earth herself. And through that interchange, Native peoples around the world are able to commune with Mother Earth. And so they hear Mother Earth and what she's saying and what we need to do. And this is something that cannot be documented in scientific terms, empirically, but is so true. So this is one of the things that when you go to your heart, then you will know what you need to do personally with your life and or with the world. And that what you need to do, one of the things that we know as Native people is that we have to be in alignment and in harmony with Mother Earth. And what that harmony means is way different than what Western society sees it. Most of the powers that be look at us as threats, that we don't want any development, for example. But nothing can be further from the truth that we do evolve and have very sophisticated ecosystem approaches from different parts of the world. It's different, but it's something that is that reflects the what people get from being in an area. And so what we know in the Bering Sea, the scientists, bless their hearts, they're struggling with trying to understand what's happening in the Bering Sea, but they don't know the kinds of things that we know. For example, our elders tell us that the fur seals and seabirds are like honeybees. they send out scouts looking for food, and they come back and they signal it to their rookery. And that's something that scientists poo-pooed until we got together with Russian scientists. We went to the Shirshov Institute of Oceanology, and the second in command was Michael Flint, who headed up a team of transdisciplinary scientists, not interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. And so we thought, well, this is a group that we might be able to work with as Native people. And so we asked them, and they said, yes, they were chopping at the bit. And so we brought them out to the Pribilof Islands. And they worked with us where the Native people used Native science, and they used their science, transdisciplinary science, and we combined the two, and we put together a report that must have been at least 1.5 feet thick over a 4-year period. And this report, if it is published in every country except the U.S. The U.S. At that time, the peer group review group said this is primitive science. That is, joint venturing with Native people is primitive science. And so it's still not published in the U.S. today. But one of the things that the elders, when the elders said the birds and seals are like honeybees, I went to the scientists there and I said, what would it take to prove this? And they said, well, we can't do that because it costs too much money. And so I went to the Russian scientists and asked them, is there a way we can prove this? And they said, well, there's a way to show that this is probably true by comparing least awkward colonies that are 1/4 mile apart from each other, because we know what the food sources are out to the continental shelf from the Pribilof Island. And so we said, 1/4 mile apart, let's see if they eat something each different, because the only food source for least awkward was 1/4 mile from the island or 200 miles away. And what we found out was that one colony foraged 200 miles away at the continental shelf. The other colony foraged 1/4 mile away. And that was evidence enough for us. So we took that to the National Marine Fisheries Service, who manages fur seals, and we said, well, here's what we got. They said, what would it take to do this with fur seal? And they said, well, maybe about $400,000 and radio tag. We can get radio tagging and satellite telemetry data. And so I went to Washington, D.C. and got the national director for the National Marine Fisheries Service to go to St. Paul for a weekend. And at the end of it, he said, okay, what do you need? And so we got the $400,000, and the scientists found out that the fur seals, which are located in different parts of the island in rookeries, go to different places to find food. And the birds did the same thing. This is just one example of what we know that the agencies don't tap, because they are on a mission budget. Their mission for their department, they're going to find out about the number of fur seals, let's say, or in the case of Fish and Wildlife Service, let's find out the number of birds that forage, that lay eggs, and that kind of thing. That's all they did, with just numbers. And when we took students from the high school there, 3 students, and we asked them to duplicate Fish and Wildlife Service methodologies to study seabirds, and we added the Unangan way of knowing. It says, use your Unangan way of knowing at the same time. And when they came up with their report at the end of the season, we showed that to the Fish and Wildlife Service regional director, and he came back to us 2 weeks later and said, this is the best graduate level report I've ever seen. Who did this? And when we told him it was high school students, his jaw dropped. And so the reason that this is noteworthy is because it changed the way Fish and Wildlife Service studies seabird colonies all along coastal America. Just these 3 kids.
That's hopeful.
Yeah.
That they listened. What do you hope for, if that's the correct term? Maybe hope is not so relevant as experience. What happens tomorrow or with the next breath?
That's right.
So where are we with the Bering Sea?
Well, you know, they've been studying it for 30 years. Unungan people, Pribilof, we flagged that there was an ecosystem-wide issue that was occurring in the Bering Sea starting in 1977. We testified in numerous forums, governmental forums, for 10 years, saying this is what's happening, this is what's happening. But they considered our information anecdotal. It may be useful, maybe not. We don't know, you know. And
right, it's unproven. It's a story.
And so our information never hit the surface of government publications. But what we saw was that the nearshore foragers, the distance foragers, the depth foragers, the surface foragers, birds and seals and sea lion were all having food problems. Because we noticed that birds, the adult birds, they had their breastbones sticking out, their chest muscles caved in, chicks were falling off of cliff ledges in larger numbers than ever in living memory. When we fleshed the pelt of the seal, we could see light through it. We never saw that before. All these kinds of things that told us that it was an ecosystem-wide phenomena. And the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service didn't conclude that until 10 years later, and that we were right, and that they would have shaved off hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of scientific time in forming their hypothesis, which was at that time high seas net entanglement was the reason that fur seals were declining. But we knew differently. And had they listened to us in the very beginning, they would have shaved off 10 years from their studies. Now, after 30 years of this kind of research, they still can't say what's happening to the animals and birds that are declining, and they're declining massively. I mean, the Bering Sea is restructuring in a way that is very hard to recognize now. We have, you know, stellar sea lions are down by 80%. Fur seals are down from a population of 1.2 million when I was there to about 475,000 today, and still declining. We have seabirds that are, you know, that are massively they're down by 60 to 80% from 30 years ago, and still nothing's happening in the Bering Sea to change the way that we manage. And we maintain that we need to change in a way that gives Native people an equal seat, or they fund us so that we can develop our own capacity. In the meantime, we can interact with the scientists every 6 months or a year or so and say what worked, what didn't work, and why, and figure out what to do to solve the problems. We're making a little progress, but not anywhere near what's required right now. And so one of the things that St. George, for example, has decided to do is that they are going to be a voice for the animals and birds that are declining. And they want to establish a national marine sanctuary on St. George that goes out to the continental shelf. And because they feel like no one's speaking on behalf of the whole Bering Sea. They're speaking, yes, for their regions. And they all are concerned about what's happening in the other areas, but we don't have the capacity to interact with each other.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any communications with the new administration or the Fish and Wildlife Service recently, or these organizations? Have you been given any indication of changes in policy or approach?
Yeah. NOAA takes care of the National Marine Sanctuary programs. And we have a total of 5 years to get our program together for St. George. And we're in year 4. We're now going into year 5. And the Biden administration officials are very enthusiastic about what we're proposing. But we have to deal with the negative aspects that are being brought out by the industrialized fishing industry that says this plan will destroy fisheries. But nothing can be further from the truth. It just calls for research that will be that's the way that the North Pacific Fishery Management Council operates anyway, but that we would have special research in the Bering Sea that is focused on these areas of why the declines of these species are happening. We're on year 4, going on year 5. And next year, hopefully, we will be successful in getting this through, but it requires the approval of all the stakeholders in the Bering Sea. And that first will mean, of course, the native people of the Bering Sea. There are about 65,000 people. And the state of Alaska, the congressional delegation, the fishing industry. These are people that we have to reach to help them understand what this kind of designation doesn't threaten fisheries. But right now, they are spreading rumors, some of them are spreading rumors that this is an anti-fishing measure.
That's a very simple way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Is complexity part of the problem, that's hard to communicate, or if the experience isn't there?
It's the way the Western system works, which is unfortunate. But hopefully we can get through that so that what we develop in the Bering Sea will revolutionize management of the oceans worldwide.
Have you had contacts with other Arctic nations?
Yes.
Well, Russia. You mentioned Russia, but I'm thinking of Finland and Sweden and Greenland, Denmark. And
we plan to bring up people that are already members or already have a designation of a marine sanctuary in their area, and to come to Alaska to tell what they experience in terms of all of the things about managing marine sanctuaries and its impact on fisheries. In all cases, the fishery improved.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's any case where the fishery did not improve.
Do you notice changes in temperature? Is temperature part of the changing equation?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the word climate change as we use it or the policy implications. I'm just talking about is the ocean warmer year over year?
There's no question that the Bering Sea is 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius warmer than it was 30 years ago. And that's affecting everything, including everything inland of Alaska, where, for example, we have salmon that are showing up with parasites that are breeding in the Bering Sea, and it's warmer, so they're breeding faster, and they're feeding on salmon. And we have so much I mean, just one example of the salmon themselves, the elders feel like it's going to disappear. And this is a big thing because Alaska is known for its wild salmon. And not only are they showing up with parasites, the people are saying they're showing up with lesions on them. And the reason for that is because the water levels in all the rivers, including the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers, are so low in some areas that the fish are rubbing against the rocks, getting lesions as a result. And so one year there was 40% of the salmon up the Yukon River were showing up with lesions. Then you've got beaver dams showing up. I mean, beaver dams are showing up in every river body in Alaska now, even above the Arctic Circle. We're seeing beaver above the Arctic Circle. We've never seen that before. And so when they create beaver dams, that further exacerbates the problem of lower water levels. And, you know, it just goes on and on.
Is the range of the beaver expanding because of the temperature change, or?
Yes, it's because of the temperature change and change of forage, where they're going further north for the food that they normally have in their area, but now has gone further north. The trees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard there's trees on the tundra now.
Yep, there is.
That they're rooting.
And we're having tundra fires. You know, there's so many things. And what people need to realize is that they interact with each other. When we have tundra fires and we have the salmon having problems and the beaver going north, and you know, all of these things interact with each other, most of it in a negative way. Mm-hmm. Right now, in the climate crisis that we have.
Can you talk to me a little bit specifically about the Yukon River salmon and what your thoughts are, your experience?
When I was up in one of the Yukon River villages, for example, a woman called over and said, "Here, I want you to take a look at this." And she has salmon hanging on her wooden frames, and she pulls on the meat or the flesh of the salmon, and it falls off. This is something that has never happened before. And we know that that is due to all these factors that I'm talking about that are affecting salmon. That's just one example. Another example, I was in Chalkitsik, and the state of Alaska was going to cut down the take of moose from the local people. And so they called together 7 chiefs of the area. And the guy explained he was doing aerial transects to do a ratio check on bull moose to female moose. And he took 45 minutes to discuss it. And then the chiefs listened very, very patiently. And then the head chief said, "Did you notice that the water levels in the rivers are going down?" He says, "No, hydrology is not my department." And he said, "Do you know that when water levels go down, the forages that moose eat disappear?" And he says, "No, you know, that is somebody else's bailiwick. It's not my department." And he says, then the chief continued on, "Well, do you know that there are more beaver dams in the area?" And he says, "No, you know, beavers are another department, another agency that takes care of beaver." And so that's the way the conversation went. And then finally, this guy from the state says he genuinely wanted to do something positive. So he said, "Maybe you should talk to the Board of Game." and you could hear the silent moans of the chiefs, because they know that the Board of Game uses best available science to make decisions on these things, and best available science de facto means not native ways of knowing. And so they knew that this would be a useless thing. So it's really quite challenging.
There's an official term for native ways of knowing, I think, right? Like an abbreviation like TKE, traditional knowledge and...
Well, that's the Western way.
Okay.
We say traditional knowledge and wisdom. The elders are saying this knowledge without wisdom is not only useless, but could be dangerous. And that wisdom is not factored in Western science. And so we developed warehouses full of information. We're the most knowledge-based society in the world, in history. And look at what the results are. Without that wisdom, I'm afraid, we're not going to do it on knowledge alone. It's not logical. It's not rational. It comes from the heart. And that's where you get the wisdom. So anyway, TKW.
KKW, good, thank you. Well, there's a lot of complexity and overlapping subject matter, as you mentioned, in the eyes of the Western science, and where for you on the island, you live there. It's about life. It's about everything around you.
Yep, that's for sure.
And it's funny how that's simpler, but it's more complex. The ability to see and understand and fit in is a much more complex situation.
That's right. And it is a kind of a science, this native ways of knowing. That, scientists think it's not that can be categorized as science. It can't be categorized in the way that Western education and training systems work. But, do we validate information? The assumption is we don't validate. But we have a validation system that is informal. We tell each other about what we're seeing and all that. And then pretty soon everybody says, yeah, we're seeing that too. And that's when they say, okay, this is happening. It's an informal process that is accurate. I mean, when you think about it, Native peoples have been in Alaska for 10,000 years. And when you go out hunting and fishing, you need to be 100% accurate in knowing what's happening. Otherwise, people die, or you put your crews in unsafe conditions, or you don't get food. We had to do this. And that's what we have inherited today.
Is there anything you'd like to say to my colleagues in New York City who will be watching this? You speak to Columbia. We have a different group at City University of New York. They're very diverse. They're from all over the world. They have a lot of different perspectives.
Yep, I know, but it's still following an epistemology that is problematic by itself. I would just ask your colleagues to really listen to what I've said with an open mind and hopefully open heart, that when you really delve into native ways of knowing, right now the science is only touching the tip of the iceberg of what we know. And if you can become an ally to us in trying to set up systems that can respond to Western science, then you're going to really get into what's really happening and what we need to do about it. Lacking that, we're lost.